Rounding out our interviews, we've got producer Donald P. Borchers. Just a little word of warning. Mr. Borchers was talking to me from a Starbucks, so the audio quality isn't that great. Plus, it kind of cuts in and out at times, so hopefully we'll use the power of editing to make it sound a little bit smoother than the original recording.
Let's talk a little bit about Far From Home. How did that project come together?
The year was somewhere around 1981-ish. I had developed my first screenplay that didn't get sold, but it was kind of futuristic thinking. It was called Test Pattern. The idea was kind of like in the vibe of a Dr. Phibes kind of spooky movie. Somebody like Vincent Price could look through your TV box and cable box and see into your home. And that was the horror gag. The script wasn't that good, and we tried to market it, and I figured I need a new script. And I was working at AFCO Embassy, but I was, like everybody else in town, trying to do a hustle. I read this newspaper article about this kid in Florida. And what happens is he watches so much television, he kills his mother. He's 10 years old, stabs her to death with a knife, dozens of times, and cannot process at the age of 10 being raised in a trailer park why it is. It's just like the Roadrunner. She didn't reanimate. That inspired me to get an idea for a movie, and I called that movie Test Pattern. And at the time I called it Test Pattern, everybody alive knew that what happened when the station signed off at the end of the day. So I needed a writer, and I needed some money. So I pitched my idea as a one-page concept to Blossom Khan, the head of production for AFCO Embassy, the company I worked at. And she figured, he's asking for nothing yet. He's asking to hire a writer. I get to approve the writer. If I don't like the writer, it'll never happen. If I like the writer, why wouldn't I want to develop? It sounds like an interesting idea. And people take ideas from the newspapers all the time. I had been working in the accounting department, and I had finished a project in New World where my job, which was over the years changing, but principally involved in rendering statements to outside producers in one way or another. Before I went into the production department, I had convinced the treasurer, Roger Burlage, to buy a Fortran 4 computer and automate everything. And in the summer of, I want to say 79, 80, around, my intern was Gail Katz. I kind of was asking around to people I knew like Gail, and she knew Chick, and Chick knew this guy named Ted Gershony. And he had a really nice resume. I mean, here I am this many years later. I can't remember it, but it was nice. And I said, Ted would write this? And Chick says, yeah, Ted would write this. So Blossom gave us some money from AFCO Embassy, and Ted wrote a first draft. Now, at the time, Jonathan Kaplan had just done this thing with Matt Dillon, which was considered very edgy. It was about high school students in a housing development, and they were bad kids.
Over the Edge.
That's the name of it. We were thinking, we'll go that kind of way with it. And so Ted kind of was taking us in the kind of direction that maybe Jonathan Kaplan might want to direct it. But it was a first draft, and it needed a second draft. Blossom wasn't in the mood to give Ted more money. A lot of development executives feel we've given them any money, they should give us something we could shoot if they're real writers. And I think she was no different in that respect. From that ilk of people, I'm not saying they're all like that, but I'm saying some are, and she may very well have been one of them. She was the person, literally, at AFCO Embassy that collared John Carpenter after Halloween's success and got him to make The Fog for AFCO. You got to give 100% of that credit to Blossom Khan. So having met, I worked on The Fog. I was the accountant, and everybody did more than one job. But Tommy Lee Wallace was the production designer and the editor, and lived around the corner from me. Just, coincidences of life. So I started to become friends with Tommy, just, talking about things, hanging out. And I knew he was writing an Amityville thing for De Laurentiis. And so I knew that a lot of people respected his writing. And I said, why don't you read this thing Gershony wrote and see if you got a take on it? You can direct it, for Pete's sakes. And he liked the sound of that idea. And so then he wrote a draft, and it was pretty good. But then Norman Lear bought the company. So it kind of died there. flash forward to around 86-ish. And I meet Skip Steloff, who's touting Flipper the movie and such things. And I meet his daughter, Ellen, who works for Vestron. And she's in the acquisitions department. And she wants to buy lots of movies. And she doesn't have the kind of money where she can call CAA and say, what does your A-list director want to do next? We want it. Well, yes, they wanted it, but no, they didn't have the money to pay for it. They had to do business with independents like me. When I met her and started to talk to her, I'm going through a laundry list of everything I have either a finished script or a concept on. And she's, meh, meh, meh. And so then I say, test pattern, Tommy Lee Wallace. Now, at this point in time, it's still owned by Avco Embassy, who, to make matters worse, now actually belongs to Dino De Laurentiis. That's a story unto itself. He now owns the old Avco library of developed properties. I got to go get the rights. I don't know Dino De Laurentiis, and I have no reason to believe he'd return a phone call if I had placed one to him. If you go to producer school, which there really isn't a good one, what they should be teaching you on day one is producers are not in the business of granting options. Producers are in the business of collecting options. Dino De Laurentiis is a producer. He's got the script I want. I developed that script. He's a good producer, so he should know that he's got no business ever giving an option on one of his properties to another producer. It's just bad produced. If that producer wants to get that made, well, a partnership should be forged, not a buyout. So anyway, I want a buyout. So it shouldn't happen. So I remember all the jobs I've ever had. And one of the jobs I had was being a tour manager at Cartan Travel, which required that over the course of less than 12 months, maybe 8 months employment with them over a period of a few years, I had spent the better part of maybe 6 or 7 calendar days inside their home office in Chicago. It was a real treat when you got to go there and meet everybody and walk around and get free Cokes out of the machine and things. I really remarked one day when the vice president of the company sits me down, gives me a free Coke, holds it up and says, it's the little things, And then we both look out and his secretary is getting a dozen red roses delivered. My takeaway from it was, that's the button you want to push if you want to get her to do something for you. And I remembered that. So here I am trying to get Test Pattern made, knowing that I can sell it to Vestron, but Dino owns the rights. So my first order of business was to call Dino. And what's going to happen is whoever screens his phone calls is going to answer. The fact that she's being paid to screen the calls, she knows the lay of the land. She knows who to send through. And it's not like today when you have email, like where you could just send an email directly to Dino. I mean, you can't, he's dead, but right. But to whom it may concern, and they may very well see it. They may very well see that email, because they may very well not have their email all screened. Most talent agents don't particularly have their email screened. I call up and she says, who's this? Donald P. Borchers. I said, and who am I speaking to? And she says her name. And then I say, could you spell that, please? And she spells her name. Well, I already have his address. Before the end of the day, she had a dozen red roses from me. Thank you for the phone call. And I know I'm on his waiting list. So now she calls me back after she gets the roses, right? Yeah, I said, so, I used to work at Avco Embassy, and I read this newspaper article. I got Ted Gershony, I got Tommy Lee, and I want to run with it. I don't want my baby dead over there. I want my baby back. And she fully understood. Maybe the next day, I get a call from Dino De Laurentiis. Hey, what's going on here? He asks me why it is that he should do it. And I think I somehow pull out of my ass that I'm the best guy with movie budgets in the business. You might want me to do a budget for you. You might need a favor from me one day. And I know he's Italian, So with his secretary's recommendation and me promising to reimburse all the costs, now from his point of view, and I say this to him, I said, Dino, you know and I know, I'm identifying a screenplay that's not quite ready to shoot. you don't even know you own. So when you bought the company, you didn't even figure it had a value, zero. Now you look it up, they got like 20, 30 grand in writer's fees, add on the interest for a few years. That's found money, man. Why not just take the profit? And you win, I win, everybody wins. I'll do you a favor. The favor came later on a movie. I'll be damned if I can remember anything about it. Anyway, he brought me in to produce a movie for him years later that he ended up changing directors. And when the director left, the new director had their own producer. And so I then just exited. But I had developed a pre-production on it and more than repaid the favor. So here I am now with the rights to proceed, and Vestron steps up and they give me the production contract and advance the turnaround money. We buy Odino, we got the rights back. And what happens next? I call up Tommy Lee Wallace, tell him the great news. He's really excited. And a strange turn of events happens. Ellen now gets input for the first time from the head of the department. I forget the guy's name, real Yahoo. And he fancied himself as the guy in Goldstein's book, Adventures in the Screen Trade, is the guy who knows everything. Yeah, he can tell. He knows. Just ask him. The first thing he says is, yeah, it should be the girl's story who comes through town and gets victimized by the kid who watched too many TV commercials after he kills his mother. All that stuff was in the script, right? But it was all featured from the point of view of the kid. In our movie, that was played by Anthony Rapp, the guy who's on the Star Trek series now. And he was in Rent. And it was clearly his movie in the screenplay Test Pattern. He was the protagonist. You meet him in the opening scene, not Drew Barrymore. And then Larry went on to say that he thought that somebody like Brooke Shields, should be the girl. Well, and I made the perfunctory phone call. And once again, the reason they're talking to me is they don't have the money for people like Brooke Shields. So that was never going to happen. But I'm rolling with it. And I've got the greatest casting director in the world. And she talks to the agent so often that she knows the current status as of lunchtime, who's in rehab, who's not, et cetera, et cetera. So she knows that Drew Barrymore, yes, at the age of 13, has just completed rehab. Isn't that sad? But what that means to an independent producer is if you start with the premise that a deal's a good deal, if it's good for both sides, well, that's a good deal then for both sides. Well, it would be good for us to have Drew Barrymore star in our movie. She was at E.T. It would be good for her to be in our movie. She needs to prove to the world that she's sober, can hit a mark, can remember lines, and be on a budget. And this is a low budget. So I'm employable, baby. I'm back. It's good for both of us. And we didn't pay her minimum wage. We paid her full Schedule F, which is the minimum flat picture contract, which at the time, I think it was like $45,000 for the picture. I think it went up to 65 at one point. I don't know what it is today, where you can just pay the actor one chunk of money and that buys out the show, essentially. It doesn't buy out things like meal penalties, or things like that, but you get the idea. And so she was on board. We budgeted her mom. She needed a guardian. And Tommy and Lee started to get to work on the script, and that had to immediately stop because the next thing that happened was there was a writer's strike. So he's not allowed to finish the script. I owned a production company, and we signed an agreement to be part of the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. It's called the AMPTP. I was aligned with them for negotiating, but the same way you have to re-sign the guild agreement every 3 years, so do you have to stay an active member of the AMPTP. And I was at a point that coincided where I could be an independent again, negotiate it all by myself, my own company. And the Writers Guild would legally have to do it if you ever spent 5 minutes and read the rules that are called the National Labor Relations Board rules, which I actually learned in college. And the NLRB rules require the unions do things like bargain in good faith with a bona fide employer. And if I'm a signatory to an actors agreement and I've been making movies under the same banner, this is like movie number 12, which was the case, it'd be bad faith not to negotiate with me. What the Writers Guild does is they put out an interim agreement. They want everybody to stay unified, which they successfully did in, 2008? The strike appeared to be solid up until me. What happened with me was I really wanted to make my movie. So I went to Tommy Lee and I said, Tommy, we know each other. we don't screw with each other. We both care about the movie. We both understand the budget. We both understand what we're doing. We both understand you shouldn't be asked to write non-WGA, and I shouldn't ask you to write non-WGA. But this is the interim agreement they just gave. You ready for this? The writer gets final cut. Now, why does the WGA put that? Yeah, why do they put that in the interim agreement? Because they know that there isn't a single producer, studio, or production company that could, should, or would agree to that. So they know they have a non-starter because they don't want to make any fucking independent deals. That's what kills a strike. People aren't going to strike the studios. They're going to work under the table for the studios. Here's the thing about writers. You can't prove the day they wrote. All they have to do is wait till the day the strike's over, then add 7 days to it. And that's the day they wrote the thing they've been writing for 4 months, getting paid every week. And this is the problem with writer strikes. So this is why they could not strategically offer an agreement on my fucking movie that I've been waiting years to get made. So now they have to go through the charade of negotiating. And from their point of view, it's like, what was that Netflix series, Game of Thrones and the Red Supper, where they just like kill everybody in the audience. You know, they're just going to bring in 20 producers at a time at a table. I'll have them talk to the executive director. I think his name was Brian Walton. Don't shoot me if I'm wrong. I'm not great with remembering names. And then one by one, be affronted and then be asked, well, what's your counter offer? And I'll take it to the board, you know, and try and waste 90 days. Right. And that's their goal. So I remember, you know, producer number one, a big VIP. I remember specifically Gail Ann Hurd standing up. I remember specifically Deborah Hill standing up in my group. Right. I'm like the 14th guy. I'm represented by the firm that Linda Lichter's a part of, but it isn't Linda who's there that day. It's her associate, Peter. And all the attorneys have been standing up because the producers are so offended, right? And they're making this argument, that argument. And so I put my hand on Peter's shoulder. I go, no, let me speak for myself, Peter. He's my attorney, but he's being paid for by Vestron. I don't have the kind of money to pay Linda Lichter's firm. And so everybody's got a vested interest in seeing this thing going, and it's not that much money. So I put my hand on his shoulder. I stand up. I said, Brian, I read every single word of this interim agreement. I wanted to be like Gregory Peck in To Kill a Mockingbird and make him think that I was standing in his shoes and appreciating his position. I said, I think I may very well have created the exact same document for the exact same reasons, which is why I'm here to say I'm prepared to accept this agreement as it is, sign it right now, and get back to work before the end of the day. No negotiation. Everybody gasped. Brian literally fell out of his chair. I mean, he had to like pick himself back up. This is the one thing that they knew would never, ever happen. Well, once everybody saw that Brian then backtracked, well, you know, I didn't say it was ratified by the board yet. I mean, I'm going to have to bring this back to the board for ratification. I said, well, bring it back to the board for ratification. This is offer made in good faith. And I said, I'm the only one in the room I think that's not an attorney. I think it's called offer and acceptance, sir. You offered me something. I said I agree with every, and I think I swear a lot. So I think I said fucking word. And Brian knew me very well because I had my own agreement with both the DGA and WGA. I had the Planet Productions agreement, not the AMPTP agreement. We called them the special low budget agreements. So that he knew me. You know, I stood up. Never expected this to happen. Does all that double talking, you know, I'll have to check. And so now Gail Ann Hurd, who is pretty much always the sharpest knife in every drawer, stands up immediately. I agree with Mr. Borchers. I also want this interim agreement. Deborah Hill, she figures out the sham. She's a player. She lived in a Jeep in San Francisco when she produced a movie, for Pete's sakes. I mean, she knows a con man. She jumps up and she goes, yeah, me too. I'm going to take the interim agreement as it is and get back to work tonight too. And so like half the people in the room now are with me on this. And Brian's got a really big problem on his hand. He's got to now come back and report to them that their agreement that they offered was voted down by the board. Not acceptable. They got to start over. And, you know, and the outrage, you know, what are we supposed to do? Counter our own offers? You made an offer, we accepted it, and we're supposed to like counter your offer and make it better. So I explained all of this to Tommy Lee, what happened. And he believes me, you know, and he knows Deborah Hill. He worked on that show. She lived in the Jeep. She was with John Carpenter for years. Tommy grew up with John. I mean, that if anybody could call Deborah and check the veracity of the story, Tommy did. He did. And he said, I think his words were something like, and again, I'm paraphrasing, fuck Brian Walton. And he goes, you get your ass up to location. You bring me up to location with a typewriter. I'm sitting there in Gerlach, Nevada, where, FYI, they set the land speed record. It's just nothing but flat. Gerlach is where the westernmost part of the highway system elbows around and comes back. Nothing comes from the west, passes through Gerlach, and ever goes farther east because there's no road. I mean, you cannot do it. They have Burning Man in that area for all the same reasons. So Tommy's like, just get me up to Gerlach. Nobody will even know I'm up there. I'll just do it. I'll just say that everything I wrote under the original deal. You can just pay me the same money, and I'll sell you a script. We'll figure it out. And that's the way we move forward. Luckily, the whole process of making our movie took enough weeks, 2 or 3 months, before we got into production, that Tommy went forward in good faith, and also in good faith when there was finally a way to get back on board with the WGA. I signed everything back onto it, So everything worked out, and we got the movie made. But along the way, once they changed the protagonist, and we went with Drew, and Tommy's rewriting the story to make it her story, and it's fine. It was a good movie either way. I was happy to make either picture. It occurred to me that the title didn't work anymore. And I'm frantic for the new title because my responsibilities, and I'm not telling the story sequentially, I'm just recounting the important events of pre-production. At one point, and this would have been rather around the same time that the writers went on strike, we needed to name the director. And I needed a new title. I'm driving around in my car around Hollywood, being a rambling, gambling kind of guy and doing my thing and listening to the radio. And I'm listening to 10,000 Maniacs. And they've got a song that's essentially chorusing the words Far From Home. And a light bulb went off in my head. And I said, well, for Drew Barrymore, that's the song. And then the next day I went to work and I wrote a letter to Anne Rice because we had exchanged a few letters. She liked my Ken Russell movie, Crimes of Passion, and I liked her vampire movie and her vampire book and Interview with a Vampire. And she said that she had just finished a new book and wanted me to read Belinda. And I had read that. And so I wrote her a letter back and said, I wanted to be Drew Barrymore's summer book in the movie. So I'm into Vestron and I'm winning all my agendas. I want Drew's summer book to be Belinda. Oh, that's a great idea. I want the new title to be Far From Home. Love that title. Perfect. Got it on one. I didn't go in with a list or anything. I just said this new title. And I said, and I want Ron Colby to direct it. Now, I had known Ron over the years in a number of ways. He's one of those guys that really has mastered the business. He was a casting director. He knows Broadway. He was a location manager. He's a production manager, a line producer. When they were filming the Coppola's movie, The Conversation, Coppola gave him a stipend and the use of his crew and equipment. And Ron shot a short called The Photographer, which was screenable at the time. You just book a screening room and he brings his print over and you watch the movie. I could get a screening room when I was head of production at New World. And so and also when I worked at Avco. So I used to do it all the time. And I watched Ron's movie on one of my days, watching people I knew and wanted to be in business with. And so I thought Ron could be a pretty interesting director, especially if you're on a budget, because he knows how to produce. And this just all makes sense. And I had produced Ken Russell, and Ken Russell had produced all those music documentaries for the BBC. He knew what a budget was. I mean, so it was really easy working with him to maximize the spend. He wasn't fighting over stupid things or for stupid reasons, which immature directors may not want to comprehend the entire spend and just be childish about something. And Ron, I knew wasn't going to be like that, and I really wanted to direct it. So they just poo-pooed the idea out of the gate because he didn't have zhuzh. I don't know how to say it. That thing that some people look for that gets them excited. He won the golden, whatever the thing is, at this film festival, whatever it is. Okay, good for him. Okay, but I'm telling you, I know Ron, and I know he can connect with this material, and I know he can knock it out of the park. So I say to Ron, well, that's where I'm at. It's almost like you're going to have God put his arm around you and say, trust me on this, guys. And he says, I could do that. And I said, I bet you can't. He goes, No, seriously. Coppola always said that if he could ever help me get a directing gig, tell him who to call. He says, who do you call? I said, Ellen Steloff. Now, the thing about Skip Steloff is he's a real practical joker. Now, Ellen's not an unimportant executive at Vestron. She's got a secretary, a proper office, a view that you would, kill for. And she's doing quite well. And her dad calls up the secretary all the time and says things like, this is Ronald Reagan, is Ellen in? And so knowing that her dad always says he's somebody famous, who he's not, on the day, the phone comes in. This is Francis Ford Coppola. I'd like to speak to Ellen. And you can hear Ellen whine from the next room. Tell my dad I'm busy. And she goes, Mr. Steloff, Ellen's busy. And he goes, I don't know who Mr. Steloff is. Again, this is Francis Ford Coppola. I'd like to speak to Steloff. Ellen, he's insisting he's Francis Ford Coppola. And he's not going away. Sounds like it might be important. I'll put him through. Before he could say, this is Francis Ford Coppola, Dad. And he's like, no, this is Francis Ford Coppola. I've been trying to explain this to your secretary. Now he gives a reference like, and if it's no good, I'll redirect the picture, kind of reference. Like, how could you not have hired after you heard his words? Yeah, not saved for eulogy, delivered right now in person up front ahead of time. And Ellen's boss, this Yahoo, who already mucked up my title and my concept, which, by the way, I think when you're making exploitation pictures, I don't think there's any honor in being true to the original concept. At the end of the day, if you're going to do a slasher movie, like Test Pattern wanted it to be, and when I say slasher movie, let me withdraw that, teen angst movie, the way Over the Edge was, the Jonathan Kaplan picture, which was what Test Pattern wanted to be. And then you shift gears and say, I think there's more money into making it a female teen exploitation movie. You put a teen girl in trouble. You add on to that a peculiar marketplace advantage where that teen girl could literally be Drew Barrymore at that year, at that date, inside our budget. Perhaps it was a much better idea than the one I started with. So he says, I want to get a video director like from Propaganda Films who's been making these really hot music videos for MTV, and then the directors go on to make really stylized pictures. I suggested that if you talk to somebody like Mike Nichols, who said, when I directed Day of the Dolphin, I was really worried about all my camera angles. When I directed The Graduate, I was really worried about the performance. You want the camera angles? Yeah, let's go with Mirt Avis. He's interesting. He's available. He's psyched to do a movie. He'll work at the budget range. He'll deliver a picture that'll be really interesting to look at. So if you want the performance, let's go with the guy that used to work on Broadway. And Coppola says, I said, I think the money here, since we have Drew, I think the money's in performance. That's my bet. And I bet on Ron. And they said, well, if you want to make the movie here and not argue about anything, then make it with Mirt. And I said, once again, happy to make it with Mirt. Had to make my argument for Ron because he was my first choice. But everything about Mirt sounds good to me. And I met him, and then he came in and interviewed in front of me and everybody at Vestron for the job. This was before they picked him. But in the interview, what won him over, and I couldn't figure it out. To this day, I really can't figure it out. But I saw it happen in the room, the magic, when he started to explain what the movie sounded like. I don't remember the words he used or the descriptions he used, but he really had a hit on it. Perhaps, and this may just be me having a false recollection, the way water drips makes a sound. And he related it to a scene in the picture and talked about featuring it in the mix. And boy, he won the job, hands down. Ron came in and talked about the fact that he read the script and looked at the schedule and was pretty sure it'd be a challenge, but it could be done. Very realistic approach about everything. So now we're weeks away from our target date, and here's where we're at. We don't have a location locked down yet. We have to recast one of the leads.
Who was that?
Anne Ramsey was Susan Terrell, and she was cast. Now, there's a guy who does all the insurance cast physicals for decades, Dr. Don Michelson. All through the 70s and 80s, if you were insuring a movie, you pretty much had your cast person get driven over to Dr. Don Michelson's office on Sunset, pop in and out, and get stamped approved for the move. So we send Anne in. She gets her cast physical. She becomes insured. And approximately 3 weeks later, she dies of terminal cancer. It's like, how do you miss that, Don? You could have saved everybody some time here. Now, the good news for me was I had a bona fide insurance claim, and I'm nobody's fool. So if we're having problems getting the location or whatever, I think it's pretty much really a function of recasting at this point. That's my disposition. So now with Susan Tyrrell firmly in place, and I'd known her from Angel, and she got nominated for that John Huston picture.
Oh, Fat City, yeah.
Real actress. I mean, range. I mean, good. The talent in front of us with Anthony Rapp, Drew Barrymore, Matt Frewer, Jennifer Tilly. I mean, Linda Francis gave me an amazing cast, and she had this real way of being able to find out why these dates the actors really could make an excuse to accept my paltry budget, which was always SAG and always over scale, but never really much more than Schedule F. The maximum flat picture buyout, pretty much always topped out there. But, for working actors, and it all makes sense. So now how do we nail down the location? Reno seems to make sense for things like the telecommunications tower, driving shots to and from, such things, interiors, building interior sets. But it doesn't really make any kind of sense for a lot of other stuff that Gerlach's pretty much perfect for in every way, except but for the fact that Gerlach at this point in history that year had two brothers, and it had two bars. And one brother owned one bar and the other brother owned the other bar. And it was said through legend that neither brother had spoken in the 38 years since the day the one had married the love of the other's life. And for us to make this movie, we're going to need to do things like shoot at both bars, not have one guy be an ass because we're working with the other guy that day. We have this kind of like town hall, and I forget where the middle ground was. I think they agreed to let one of the brothers use the bar, but it may have been the school for neutral ground. But you get the idea. There isn't that many people in Gerlach. It's not like there's 1,000 people in Gerlach. It's a question of hundreds and low in number. And a lot of them live in trailers. And there's a school and everything. So they all get together and they're going to vote that night. I think it was a bar, come to think of it, because at one point our location manager, Alicia Alexander, she actually pulled her top off to convince these drunken bastards to vote for her. I don't want to lose my job. I need a location by Monday or I'm out of here. And don't you want me to come back? And they all agreed, and we got into the town, and it was very political tiptoe through that town. I mean, the brothers never reunited on our watch. We had heard stories that in the few moments over the decades where one or the other brothers got really bad flu, that the other brother would bring like homemade soup in the middle of the night when nobody could see. But who knows? It's one of those legendary tales of lustful jealousy. So that's where our challenges were, getting the script turned around from the original New World, then Dino De Laurentiis, finding the director, changing the shift in the protagonist, doing all of that under the cloud of the Writers Guild strike, and then figuring that out after the fact. And here's interesting things I learned as production notes producing the movie. The first thing I learned is your budget form really needs to have a line item that can be ignored everywhere except when you're shooting in the fucking desert that says refrigeration. Refrigeration's a big issue in the desert. It's an issue for food spoilage. It's an issue when you just are a smart producer, and I'm not stupid. So the first thing I did was I commandeered the largest standing structure, which was the high school. I put a lease on it. And in my lease, I was allowed to lay plywood over their gymnasium floor and then build anything I wanted on the plywood. So I built all the standing sets that I would need for rain cover. And it's oddly enough, when you're shooting in the desert, it's not so much on a rainy day when you call the cover, although when it does rain, you do call the cover, as rare as that is. It's these dust devil days where these little tornadoes come up and they're going to like turn your car over if you drive around in them. So yeah, we had to go inside and shoot those sets, call cover maybe once or twice. But here's the thing that you learn quickly when you don't know it for the first time and you didn't have that line in your budget. The carpenters, they got to stop working after a couple hours. They're going to like die of stroke. You have to rent these things. They're called forced air units, and they just pummel cold air into a place. And you get 2 or 3 of those babies inside a proper sized basketball gymnasium, and it's 65 degrees all of a sudden. But you're spending gasoline like nobody's business with the petrol running those generators, unless you can power them off. And then maybe you can get the school to not pay attention to the fact that they'll get that electricity bill in a month after we're gone. Other lessons learned was the importance of these little neck handkerchiefs. Keep dipping them in either water or a thing called sea breeze and wearing them around your neck, because we're shooting in the desert, And we had to bring caravan tents because there's absolutely no shade. So if we didn't create natural shaded areas just for people who weren't particularly working that minute, so they had a moment off, but we weren't giving them a private room to be in. They were crew workers. We had to provide shaded areas. So all of that falls under the title craft service. The craft service budget increases a lot when you go to special needs places. And then I did the stupidest thing, which I never would ever repeat again. I had identified 2 cars in the area through the local ads that we could buy for the show that were well within our budget range and allowed for us to send them to a shop and get any motor work or anything done or whatever and painted whatever the color you want. They were reasonably boring looking sedans. I mean, I'm not going to make any sales argument for their creative aesthetic. And then you saw the car we actually used in the movie. The director found that like strolling through a junkyard. There was no double on it. It was nothing but fucking problems the whole damn movie. I paid to put a new motor in at one point, and then the clutch would go, and then just everything. Nothing about that car ever wanted to work, or continuously, or when you needed it to. And there was no double on it. So the hero car had to do the driving shots for second unit, a scheduling nightmare. It was on the verge of sending us over budget. That's how bad it was. And I never would make that mistake on another movie ever again.
So many issues before you even roll the camera. What's it like as the shoot itself is going?
Well, it was a kind of joyous shoot. As you shoot a movie, sometimes you hit production problems. Like when I was doing a movie for Steve Friedman called The Stranger, we kept having a problem making our day because we were in the desert. You get the problem, things go slow in the desert. And so I would call up the writer, Greg Poirier, and then he would take a scene that was 4 pages long in maybe 2 or 3 different sets and make it one scene that was 1.5 pages long on one set, and we'd be right back on schedule. Well, Far From Home was no different. I'm a bit too distant to remember what the exact issues were, but I remember Tommy Lee being furious at the typewriter while we were shooting. He was still typing during week 1. That's a fact. He did get to go home, I think, around the second week or so. So when you're doing that, the new pages that come out, they're colored pages. And there's a hierarchy for this. The script this is the old days. The script starts out on the white pages, and then, maybe 10 pages got rewritten, and they come on a set of pink pages, so numbered. You open your 3-ring binder and you remove page 2 white and stick in page 2 pink. And so now you have a script that's got 2 colors in it, mostly white, a little bit of pink. And then come the blue pages and then the green pages, right? So the joke on our film was everybody's getting along so well. We've got a colored page chart for the Who's Sleeping with Who chart. There was this big hot springs out on the edge of town. And apparently a certain element of our crew used to like to go out there and skinny dip. And they'd hook up right after. And then the production office coordinator was keeping tabs on the chart. And that's the first time I found out about hall passes. I thought you were married. Yeah, but it's a location picture. She does the same thing. Okay. Drew herself was an issue. She's 13 years old. Her mother comes to me and explains a very, very, very delicate situation, which, without getting into the details of it, resulted in me having to send a married carpenter who was about 31 years old, had a wife and a couple kids, home. That put Drew in an immediate bad mood with her mother, me, the production, everything. I can't remember how the conversation got framed. I don't think I was smart enough to just walk up and bribe it. If I was, I would have, believe me. But it somehow got presented to me that if I would agree to take Drew out on the town in Reno, it would give her something to look forward to. So I'm thinking the only thing on my mind when I get to Reno is I want to shoot some fucking craps. I don't want to babysit Drew, but if that's what'll get us through it. And sure enough, she sparked up. She's smiling on the set again. Everything's getting done. And she makes a couple real confirmatory, if you will. This is going to happen in Reno, right? You're not welching, right? You know, that kind of idea. Those wouldn't have been the words, but that would have been the gist of it that I was taking away. Now we get to Reno, and it's my night to do right by Drew. I go to one of the big casinos where they have a good steakhouse, and I make a reservation, take one of the company rental cars and drive her in, and we have a very pleasant dinner. And even at the age of 13, she wore a black dress. And at the age of 13, she did not look like a 13-year-old in a black dress. And she had makeup on. She could have passed for somebody's wife, I swear to God. Knowing that and not particularly worrying about things and being a rambling, gambling guy, at the end of dinner, I say, want to shoot some craps? I mean, I'm like dying to shoot some crap. And she goes, sure. We go down to the crap table, and here's the end of the story. They don't even card her. She came into womanhood very early in life, and no one questioned it. And that fulfilled my obligation. She was a good girl up till then, and then a good girl afterwards, and very easy to work with on the shoot. And she accomplished her. I've got a great reference now, and we got a star in the movie, and everybody won. Let me say the relationship wasn't so bad that we would have a couple lunches here and then. And then we did 2 more projects together, one in a meaningful way, Doppelganger, she was the lead. And the second one, just as a personal favor to me, which demonstrates that at one time we were friends, where she signed on to do a 1-day cameo on my film Motorama, the Joe Mignon screenplay. He wrote After Hours for Scorsese. And based on that, it gave me bragging rights to walk up to people like Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers and Martha Quinn from MTV and just look at the actors. Everybody in Motorama is recognizable to somebody in the world. That was the idea. And it all started with, well, Drew Barrymore's doing it. What's your problem? Although something turned because when I was approached on the re-release of Children of the Corn as an anniversary disc in 2014-ish, Caleb Waddell said, instead of doing a making of or featurettes, we want to do, your biography. Just hook us up with some people. So I called people like Corey Feldman and Kathy Long, who'd been in my movies, that I could get on the phone. And I reached out to Drew Barrymore and I asked her agent and her manager if she would, let us bring a camera crew over for 20 minutes and just say a couple words. Did 3 movies. She said, no, whatever friendship there used to be, that's long gone, obviously. But that's life. And there it is. I'm just telling my story.
How was the film received when it came out?
We literally had bookings in theaters, literally, on the weekend that Best Drawn crashed. They were crashing to the point where, and you can't make this stuff up, they had prints that were ordered, that the lab did make, but that nobody at Vestron followed through with the delivery order to move it from the lab to the theater. The company went out of business that week. So how to do theatrically? We didn't really release. It was a release that at one point, like around a Wednesday, got aborted, but yet the word didn't get out to everybody, so it kind of burped. Ads that were paid for on television they didn't deliver the copy to run. If they just simply followed through, we had a shot. I think it's a good movie. I think it stands. Richard Masur does a spin that's awesome. Susan Terrell's turn is awesome. When they have to voyeur in to look inside the room and see 2 adults fornicating. We got real professional fornicators. They're well known in that community. I mean, I cast stars everywhere. I was right about Anthony Rapp. He went on to greatness. Anders Jones, he was like a pepperoni or a meatball or something in a Nightmare movie on a pizza. He's got a great band, Mr. Jones in the Previous, and a nice talk show up in Seattle. Yeah, I love the movie. I love everything about it. I think we did everything right. I think the score is perfect. And Matt Frewer, he is funny. I mean, the guy just drips comedy. He would constantly get me, and he'd get me every time, that he was going to, what do they say, chew the scenery. He'd never use those words. He'd do things like, I never saw it, but you could just imagine whisper, whisper, whisper. Borchers is on the set, whisper, 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 whisper. And so, I just walked straight up to the camera, look, and there they are in a rehearsal. And Matt Frewer's got like a big red clown nose on his face. And now they're going and going, okay, ready for picture. And he's still got the red clown. And they're going to keep it on there until I say something. You can't do it with the clown nose on his face. And then Matt will pull it off and say, oh, you ruined all the fun. And another day you'll walk on the set and he's got like a size 36 shoe on, constantly clowning around. Literally. I heard they're going to remake Max Headroom. I'm happy to hear that. I'm looking forward to seeing it.
I know he's not necessarily underrated, but feels like he's underused.
It's a big world. And right now, the gatekeeping is more narrow than it is. It's like the bigger the things behind the gate, the smaller the gate is to get through. If you're Shonda Rhimes or Ryan Murphy, well, good for you. But if you're not, I believe that companies like Netflix are making so many movies that are not being well received by the audience. And what I mean by that is where you take a movie like Due Date or The Other Guys that are 10 years old when they drop on Netflix, they drop in the top 10. And then you look at movies that Netflix just spent $30 or $40 million on and they don't drop in the top 10. That's the point I'm trying to make about likability. There's movies that people really like, and sometimes they're older movies, but they really like them. Netflix doesn't seem to know how to make movies that people really like on any kind of consistent basis at all. Their success rate just proves the theory that even a broken clock is right twice a day. And that's their success rate as far as this producer is concerned. And I believe that this is the reason why. I believe that no longer do you go into a studio like Warner Brothers and sit in front of somebody like Alan Horn and explain to him why you're passionate about this and why people are going to feel, and this is the emotion that you're going to create with the audience. And this is the experience that's going to happen inside the theater. I think now somebody like, and I'm just making this up, I think now somebody like Kevin Hart walks in with a director like Antoine Fuqua and says, we'll get a writer and this is what we want to do. And I think then Netflix says, if Kevin Hart and Antoine Fuqua want to do something, let's do it. I think that's removed that part of really thinking through the passion of the appeal to the audience. And that isn't at the soul of the pitch anymore. The pitch is the gettability of name actors that you would otherwise be waiting 36 months for, because that's how much money we pumped into the production pipeline that we were ourselves are creating such a demand for name actors, and the supply is so limited that we ourselves are making ourselves wait 3 years for their own availability. And that business model isn't going to create a lot of good product. And God bless Shonda Rhimes for making the good things she does and Ryan Murphy for making the good things he does. But people that just have a good thing to make that used to be able to get it made at a studio every once in a while don't have a prayer anymore, because the younger pups at the management companies and at these production companies that have mega deals at the studio, at the streamers, they're all trained like MBAs to say, what did you do last year? Well, I've been developing this for 5 years. We put craft into it. It's ready now. Oh, well, so it's 5 years old. No, it's been working on it for a while. and that's why my faith for films as I grew up to see them, they're all coming from outside the United States. I have the privilege, being a member of the Academy, to watch all the foreign films that get submitted, one from every country. They're great. I mean, what a breath of fresh air to watch movies. And when we made a movie like Far From Home, that's what we were thinking. We weren't thinking like, how can we blow up a head bigger or make something more grotesque or spill more blood? We were thinking, how can we tell a story? It started a story of a kid who watched not only too much television, but so much television, he really could not differentiate reality anymore. That was the thesis of the inaugural script. To a girl who is loath to spend the summer with her divorced parent, just wants to read this book, and then meets these two kind of cute boys. Maybe the summer will pick up again. It just so happens one of them looks like he'll kill you, and the other one is going to kill you.
It's not always the way.
But we did everything right. It was her first screen kiss. And like I say, if the company did not go bankrupt, that movie would have made a good, handsome profit for everybody. It just ended up getting ignored by the people who bought Vestron. I think today it's actually inside the library at Lionsgate, and I don't believe anybody there knows it. But hopefully it'll be on my YouTube channel one day.
We can hope. Yeah, definitely. I would love for more people to see this movie.
Me too. It's a good one. I'll be posting my vampire movie, Vamp, pretty soon. I've already got Children of the Corn up there and Little Witches and Angel. I've got more than a dozen of my movies. It's a fun channel.
Mr. Borchers, thank you so much for your time. This was wonderful talking with you.
Likewise. Thank you.